What up, gunfighters? Welcome to Gunfighter Life. I'm excited today because I got what I hope is going to be a pretty cool episode. P.D.W. cartridge. Old school versus new school. Personal defense weapons. Now and in days of yore. An oddly awesome comparison of the 30 Carbine and the 5.7 by 28? Could it be? Yes, I think we should compare these two. They're often compared to other cartridges, but I don't know that I've ever heard a head-to-head comparison of the OG 30 Carbine. What I would consider America's first P.D.W. personal defense weapon. And one of the newest kids on the block. Still not a bedwetter of a cartridge. I mean, it came out around the 90s. But a lot newer than 30 Carbine. First, real quick, welcome to Gunfighter Life. The podcast where we talk about guns, gunfighting, tactics, the right way with Almighty God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. I'm going to throw in a rapid-fire version of the bio, and then we'll get down to the nitty-gritty of the episode. Blessed to have served in the military, law enforcement, combat veteran, private contractor, competition shooter, lifelong hunter, guide. Blessed by God that He got me through all those things so I could share this firsthand training, knowledge, experience with you to serve you today. Let's dive into the podcast. First off, what is a P.D.W? Personal defense weapon. It's not going to be from the Oxford Dictionary, right? It's going to be from the thinking about it as I go along. Common gunfighter vernacular. P.D.W, a light, handy, relatively speaking, shoulder fired. That's important. Shoulder fired. Intermediate, and there's a vast swath of intermediate. Intermediate. High capacity, and that's a relative term compared to other things around. High capacity firearm. Personal defense weapon. A light, handy, intermediate cartridge. Relatively decent amount of firepower. Not designed as a frontline infantry weapon, although it can be used that way. Designed for different roles, for when that's not your primary firearm. When you're an artillery crewman or a truck driver, or you are a main war fighter, but you need something lighter and handier than a standard infantry rifle. Let's say you're doing, in modern terms, executive protection or a personal security detail or something like that. P.D.W, personal defense weapon. Now, what I consider America's first personal defense weapon, the M1 Carbine. Now, compared to the M1 Garand, relatively low power but higher capacity. That's what we're talking about. Also, quite a bit lighter. And even by today's standards, relatively light, handy weapon. 5.2 pounds. That is superb. When I talked about it, did some more specialized assignments in law enforcement. And one time I had access to an entire armory, police armory, and we still had stuff in there from back in the day. We still had like old school Prohibition era Thompson submachine guns. We also had M1 carbines, and I really enjoyed the M1 carbines. Light, handy, good for what they were. They're a fantastic weapon. They weren't known for being the most reliable, but you got to think those magazines and stuff, which were intended to be like short-term use, are, 70 years old at this point? But light, handy weapon, especially for the time. We're talking about a wood-stocked blued steel weapon that weighs 5.2 pounds. And I like the 1911. I still will rock a 1911. I've carried a 1911 on duty. I like STI 2011s, but if you said I'm going to get in a gunfight, unless there's some weird caveat, and you say I can have an M1 carbine or a 1911, I'm taking an M1 carbine. I like 45, but look at the ballistics on an M1 carbine. Get mad at that if you want, but I do believe that I would consider 357 Magnum more effective than 45 ACP, and again, I like 45 ACP. But look at the ballistics of an M1 carbine. I think you get more foot-pounds at 100 yards with an M1 carbine than you get with a 357 Magnum at the muzzle. So again, and not to mention the shootability, and remember I stipulated a shoulder-fired weapon. M1 carbine is more firepower than a 45 1911. That's kind of one of the reasons the Army, I think, was looking at it. They wanted something more effective than the 45 1911, which is an effective sidearm, but a P.D.W. is a step up from a sidearm, but not quite to the level of a frontline infantry weapon. And I think that the M1 carbine did that swimmingly. I think it was a fantastic, not frontline infantry weapon, that's not what it was designed to be. Not a rival to the M1 Garand, that's not what it was designed to be. But as what it was designed to be, a good intermediate solution for light, handy, shoulder-fired combat effectiveness. Now, I was going to use my old Hornady reloading manual, but it's so old that 5.7 is not in there. So we're going to one of the main go-to sources on the newfangled internet that wasn't even around when the M1 carbine was around, Wikipedia. I like to give credit where credit is due. Let's look at what the wiki says about the M1 carbine as far as ballistics go. 110 grain. That's like the classic vanilla loading. I know there's other loadings and stuff, but 110 grain bullet at just under 2,000 feet a second. 2,000 feet a second, not hot by rifle standards, but quite a bit hotter than all but the craziest of handgun calibers. 110 grain bullet at 1990 feet per second for 967 foot-pounds. 967 foot-pounds. And foot-pounds aren't the whole story, but they put it in perspective. A really hot, like plus P 9mm might get you around 400 foot-pounds. And I know there's 110 grain loadings, but I want to keep it I want to use the same source. So the lightest one they list on Wikipedia for 357 Magnum is 125 grain at 1450. That's a hot load. And it's a respectable, good street cred load for a handgun. Perhaps one of the most, storied calibers and loadings is 125 grain 357 Magnum for being a man stopper. And it has 583 foot-pounds. Again, the M1 carbine had 900 and something foot-pounds. It is not a pipsqueak of a cartridge. If you compare it to 30-06, yeah, it's not the same. But if you compare it to a hot handgun cartridge, it's screaming. Alright, so this was supposed to be a comparison. In the 1990s, that's a long time after the M1 carbine had been around. And it had been used a long time, but they were looking for a more modern personal defense weapon. They, as in NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was thinking, we want something modern in the middle, something more firepower than the 9mm, but something not quite as much firepower as the M16, the M4 in that class, something in the middle. And their idea was the P90. The P90 is an awesome weapon in and of itself. It's a bullpup, which I'm not crazy about bullpups, but it's a cool one. 50-round magazine, controllable in full auto, which I think they experimented with the M1, but they realized it wasn't really controllable. But that was the idea. The more modern technology, polymers, 50-round magazines, much like the philosophy moved from the 308, 30-06 to the 5.56 to a high-velocity, lower caliber, they wanted a similar thing with the modern P.D.W. A couple cartridges were looked at, the 4.6 and the 5.7. The 5.7, although neither one was really adopted, I think kind of won out in that race, or at least wasn't mass adopted, right? And had this whole trial and this whole thing about the 5.7. We're like, maybe we don't need it. Or maybe budget cuts. I don't know what the bureaucracy decided. But the 5.7 came out of that. Let us look at the 5.7. The 5.7 by 28. Now, remember the grain weights, because these are vastly different. For the M1 Carbine, basically there was one big grain weight. I'm sure you can hand load and do other stuff, and there's probably other loads, but the main load was 110 grains. These are tiny compared to that, and that's not exactly a heavy bullet. These, and we're going to try and compare apples to apples. Obviously, you probably know that the 5.7 can be shot in a handgun, but so can the .30 carbine, to be fair. But we're going to compare rifle or carbine to carbine at first. 40 grains, which again is quite a bit less than half of the M1 carbine. 40 grains out of a carbine barrel at 23.51. So it's faster, quite a bit lighter, but faster, for 665 foot-pounds. And a 28 grain at just over 3 grand at 3,060 feet per second for 789 foot-pounds. So 789 is not 900 and something, but it's not crazy far off that. But you're not really, it's a different philosophy, right? You're talking about, that's a 28 grain bullet. A 28 grain bullet is something I would use for prairie dogs. 110 grain bullet is more akin to something I would use on what I would consider a man-sized target. Here's the difference in philosophy. The P.90 was designed to be capable of full auto. And it's one of, if not the only, shoulder-fired weapon that I can think of. And I've been blessed to have a lot of experience with shoulder-fire full autos. They're mostly useless. Are they fun? Yeah. If Uncle Sam's paying for the ammo, is it cool to do mag dumps? Yeah. But let me be clear. They're not real effective. Take it from somebody that shot a lot of full autos, from Thompson submachine guns to M4s to Car-15s to even kind of really cool niche machine guns that I probably shouldn't mention because you might guess who I used to work for. I'm not kidding when I say the vast majority of full auto guns, to be effective, you fire them off the ground on at least a bipod. A tripod is better, and a vehicle mount is better still, probably. All right, I have a lot of experience with full autos. They're almost useless in a shoulder-fired weapon for all but the most extreme, like trench raid or something, which thankfully I've never had to raid a trench. I can pretend like I have. There might be a certain scenario where a mag dump is useful, but in the vast majority of situations, like ask any Marine infantryman, of which I was and was blessed to survive, how many Marine infantrymen, other than for training or just for fun, shot their weapon on 3-round burst or full auto? Like an M16 and M4. I'm not talking about, again, a machine gun, which is designed to be fired off a mount. That's one thing. But most shoulder-fire full autos are all but useless for practical, actual life-saving situations, not just for fun and not to turn money into noise. They're all fun for that. But the P.90 is kind of an exception to that. The P.90, because you're dealing with like a 28 to 40 grain bullet, not a whole lot of recoil. Even on full auto, that gun pretty controllable. So again, a different philosophy. You're not probably comparing apples to apples if you're talking about one round to one round, which let's go there. If you're talking about round per round effectiveness, although it's much older and you might say antiquated and out of date, round per round, I would not even argue that the .30 carbine, the old M1 carbine, is a more effective round per round. That said, in full auto and a P.90, you can dump a lot of rounds into a car door in a second. But round per round, the M1 carbine more effective. If you said you're going out to be in the bush and you got to put meat on the table, and these wouldn't be my first, second, third, tertiary, they wouldn't be my 10th round draft picks for doing this. But if you said I had to pick to put meat on the table, a 5.7 or an M1 carbine, I'll take the M1 carbine, right? If I'm going to shoot a deer, I could kill a deer with a 5.7. I've killed a deer with a lot of things. But I would much rather, if I had to put a deer down, an antelope down, most things down, I would take the 30 carbine. So round per round, there's no doubt in my mind the 30 carbine is more effective. Now, here's the deal. If you said, I'm back doing kind of what I used to do, being, and I've been blessed to do a lot of different gunfighter things, but EP, executive protection, really high level politicians, really high level like A-list celebrities, and I'm doing vehicle convoys in the city, I want the P90. That's what it was kind of tailor-made for, like vehicle convoys, tight, in close, urban operations. I want the P90. So, just some food for thought there. And how's this for kind of crazy? The P90 with all that new technology, its weight is 5.9 pounds. Remember that M1 carbine was 5.2 pounds, which is kind of crazy. You're talking about modern space-age polymer and all that. Now, that said, not apples to apples, because the P90 has a 50-round standard magazine. I think common were the 15-round magazines. There is or 30-round magazines, but I think 15 was like the original and most common. I could be wrong about that. I think we had both, but again, I don't know what they had like when it first came out. But even so, 30 rounds, that's a lot of firepower, but 50 rounds is quite a bit more. But they're still in the same poundage range, right? 5.2, 5.9 pounds. So that's kind of a sweet spot. So we see that there with the kind of both achieving a similar goal into a light, handy, intermediate cartridge, shoulder-fired weapon. And it might be easy to think, clear winner is the brand new, or not brand new at this point. I mean, 1990 is not that new, but much newer than the 1940s. But it's not a clear winner. It really depends on the mission. It's mission specific. Even if you look at the handgun, because both these cartridges have and can be had in a handgun. But again, what am I doing? If I'm an ultralight backpacker or an ultralight, mountain bike kind of trail rider, and I need to carry all the ammo on me, and I want a decent amount of firepower. Let's say I'm out hiking on the U.S.-Mexico border, which sadly is kind of just a mess right now. Probably going to take the 5.7 with a 20-round magazine. Again, if you set in the state where I'm in, I don't think this cartridge would be legal there because I think it specifies it has to be originally designed for a handgun. But let's say it was. Let's just say I had to pick a handgun, and I had to pick between these two again. Would have been my first, second, or third choice. But let's say I've been blessed to take quite a few deer with a handgun. Let's say I was going out to hunt deer with a handgun. Kind of same thing. And I had to pick a handgun. And I had to pick these two cartridges. That's not even not even a debate internally. I would take something like a Ruger single 6, or I think it was actually the Ruger single 6 is much too small. The Ruger Blackhawk, which was chambered in 30 carbine. I would take a Ruger Blackhawk in 30 carbine almost without question if it was only to harvest deer or antelope or even elk. That wouldn't be my first, second, or third choice. But if you said I'm going to die if I don't, I would much rather have the 30 carbine in a handgun for that task than a 5.7. Now, if you said again, you're gonna hike the Arizona Trail, which if you don't know is a trail that goes across Arizona, and I gotta hike around the border, which one of those handguns do I want? I want a 5.7 because I might get on the wrong end of a drug cartel handgun versus long gun gunfight. For that, I don't want a Ruger Blackhawk and 30 carbine. I want a 5.7, thank you. So it's an interesting debate, and maybe not one that's, I don't know if probably people have thought about it, but I'm not aware of anybody ever putting these two cartridges head to head, and I didn't look it up beforehand like somebody else doing because I didn't want to get their thoughts into my head. I try to be original, and none of this stuff is really original. Like, these cartridges have been around a while. But a cool thought experiment into maybe cartridges that aren't often compared, but if you look at the role, remarkably similar. Even though decades apart, they share a lot of similarity in the philosophy that they were designed for. A personal defense weapon cartridge. They both get the job done with different technology, different eras. But a 5-pound, lightweight, shoulder-fired, intermediate cartridge personal defense weapon. And what are you trying to do with it, right? They're both good cartridges, and they both get the job done. Do you want more power cartridge for cartridge? Well, then the .30 carbine, the M1 carbine, that cartridge is your clear winner. That gun is your clear winner. Do you want a higher power to weight ratio, right? Because one of those rounds, although more powerful, weighs quite a bit more than a 5.7 by 28 round. So if you're going pound for pound, if I got to pack all the ammo on my back, it's the zombie chipmunk apocalypse, or whatever apocalypse you're envisioning in your head, right? It's not like doomsday preppers. I'm preparing for a solar flare in the sky in 2025. No, I don't know the future. But whatever you're thinking is going to happen, if I have to carry all that ammo on my back, there's a clear advantage to the 5.7 by 28. Because if you look at a box of, let's say, 50 rounds of both, the 5.7 weighs a lot less. So when I have to carry it on my back, ounces equal pounds and pounds equal pain. So, kind of what are you doing? There's no real clear winner. It really depends on what more closely matches your philosophy. So I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. With that, let's roll in to me asking you to become a patron. Did you like this content? Was it a fun thought experiment? Was it informative? Did you appreciate a podcast that wasn't one long gun commercial and advertising trying to get you to buy a bunch of superfluous stuff that you don't need? Did you enjoy a podcast that hopefully you would listen to with your family, with young ones, without a bunch of blasphemy and horrible language and all that garbage that's not necessary and not really helpful? If you enjoyed that and you want to support the podcast, if you think, yes, this is something I want to help out, this all the buzzwords, right? Small American-owned business, veteran-owned, gluten-free, right? All the buzzwords. You want to support something like that, consider becoming a patron. Mostly because you believe in the show and you want to see it succeed. Also, patrons get a lot of cool insider-only Patreon content. I try to put out quite a bit for them. Even when I'm doing my other job, professionally gunfighting, I try and get them fresh content pretty regularly that you're just not going to get unless you're a patron. Because I want to let them know that I appreciate them. And if you're listening, patrons, I really do appreciate you. And if you want to become a patron, there should be a Patreon link in the show notes. Okay, let's get into the tactical tip of the day. It's been a while if I've mentioned these before, but you're probably familiar with a ferrocerium rod. It's a kind of metal alloy that if you hit it with something hard, it makes a spark. These are used for starting fires. They're not the great first line. It's good to have a lighter or something like it. However, the cool thing about the ferrocerium rod is they're pretty bomb-proof. They can get wet. You could leave them underwater for years and bring them up and hit them, and they will cause a pretty significant spark. There's also no moving parts or anything. It's just a metal alloy. Well, you probably know about those. They make some that have little holes drilled in them that are about the size of a zipper toggle. That's your tactical tip of the day. You can look those up. Again, I'm not pushing any brands. I don't have any sponsors. But you can look those up and you can put them, let's say, on your hunting jacket. So even if you just find yourself with just a jacket on your back and you can find a hard rock, you can make a spark. If you need to start a fire, to make a signal, to get help, to cook food, to keep warm, to stay alive, you can put them on your favorite EDC knife on a lanyard. So you got a knife, so you got something hard, and you got a ferrocerium rod, you got a knife, and you got a way to make fire. That's a pretty good thing for EDC as far as survival goes. They're not crazy expensive. You can usually get them in multi-packs. Put one on your jacket. Put one as a zipper pull on your bug-out bag. Put one on your knife. They're not crazy expensive. They're super useful. If you want to make one part of your EDC, if you just want it on your baby bug-out bag or your bailout bag or whatever, or just on your hunting jacket, they're pretty useful. you got a wife or something that you want to kind of make sure she's more prepared, but she's not into the tactical stuff. She's not carrying a Rambo knife in her teeth and do combat roles in body armor, but you want her to be a little bit more prepared. Maybe on her outdoorsy type jacket or on her camelback or whatever, you put one of these on there and tell her what it is, because it won't really do any good if she doesn't know what it is, and just tell her if she hits it really hard with something like a rock or a piece of metal, it will cause a spark. Anyway, it's a cool little thing that's available. Ferrocerium rod with little holes drilled in it for a toggle. With that, your tactical verse of the day. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to become conformed to the image of his Son. Remember, the point of your life is not to collect guns or ammo, it's to love God, to love your neighbor, to walk as Jesus walked, to live as Jesus lived. Be conformed to that. It's beautiful. With that, thank you for listening, and have a blessed day.